Breaking news from the world of soccer. The U.S. women's national team has released their roster for next month's World Cup. The Stars and Stripes are going for the three-peat in this year's tournament, which begins July 20th in New Zealand. To help get us ready for that tournament starting off, we have our soccer analyst, Sandra Herrera, with us here now to break it all down. And Sandra, I think that the biggest storyline coming into the roster before it was revealed is how would the U.S. be able to replace Becky Sauerbrunn, knowing that their captain would not be there and would not be available due to injury. Your first takeaways from seeing this roster now it's been released?
It's a little bit split. I think the biggest standout moment in this roster reveal is how split it is. You've got a mix of players who had that experience, who have previous World Cups behind them, who have lifted that trophy, who know how hard the grind is of a month-long tournament, combined with several players who are going to make their first ever World Cup appearances. We're talking double digits, 14 players on this roster, 23 in total, but 14 who are going to have their first ever opportunity to participate in a World Cup. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a mixed bag here in terms of how they are going to address and fulfill this big hole that Becky Sauerbrunn is leaving. Because we're not just talking positionally here at the center back role. We're talking about the locker room and the morale that she kind of rallies with this team and what she provides there. So I have a feeling that with a lot of those experienced players on this roster, there might be a little bit of a captaincy by committee, perhaps. We are looking at Alex Morgan, Kelly O'Hara, Megan Rapinoe as three players who are entering in their fourth ever World Cup, along with others who have 3 World Cups behind them in Alyssa Nair and Julie Ertz. And I would even argue that Crystal Dunn is a player who was part of that 2019 winning World Cup roster who can provide a lot of leadership and morale within the locker room during a month-long grueling tournament.
I know that you have an article up on CBSSports.com where you projected what the roster would look like now that we have seen it. Who do you think is the biggest snub?
I'm a little bit surprised to not see Ashley Hatch on this roster among the forward core. I'm laughing a little bit. We all make these predictions and we look back immediately and try to see where we targeted or where we missed on some of these picks. I'm a little bit proud of myself, but Hatch is one that I'm a little bit surprised in. She was with this team over the duration of the last 2 years in the build-up to the upcoming World Cup. And she is a player that has typically slotted in that targeted number 9 role, your typical center striker. And with the loss of Catarina Macario along the way and the elevated form of Alex Morgan, there was maybe a little bit of a question mark around who's going to be that backup number 9 role. And it looked for a long time like it was going to be Ashley Hatch, as someone who has been in national team camps for several months now and has also performed very well for club with Washington Spirit. Someone who has been in contention for Golden Boot, was the Golden Boot winner in 2021 and has produced for club. So I'm a little bit surprised to not see her name on that list, but the forward core I don't think is something that the coaching staff is super concerned with because they have a lot of depth at that position.
You mentioned how you might think it might be a captain by committee situation. If that is the route that the U.S. goes, do you think is that a problem to not have one designated captain throughout this run of the World Cup? And if you maybe had to pick one, who would that be?
You know, I'm gonna put my Homer hat on here a little bit. I'm a big fan of Crystal Dunn and her play on the pitch, but I think over the last couple of years she has really kind of emerged and evolved as one of the more vocal players on the pitch. And I think because of her role, she's typically been pigeonholed into that left back position, and you could see how much of an asset she is when she is available versus when she is not. But I won't be surprised if we see something similar to 2019, where we did see a bit of rotation in the armband during that tournament. It was the same tournament that they went on and dominated and came away with their 4th World Cup title. So just like I said there was depth at the forward court, it's almost like there's depth at the leadership position as well. Andonovski saying a very interesting quote saying that becoming a leader is a little bit like falling in love. You have to wake up and you don't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to be a captain and I'm going to be a leader. It's going to be a long process. It is something that comes to a player. So I would imagine that we might see a little bit of rotation of the armband depending on match day scenarios.
Sandra Herrera joining us now as the U.S. women's national team have revealed their roster for next month's World Cup, and we certainly are excited for that, and thank you for your time, Sandra. You look at the schedule for how it will break down for the Americans. They'll get started over there in that Australia, New Zealand area, taking on Vietnam on July 21st with that first match starting at 9 p.m. Eastern. Follow that up with the rest of the group play against the Netherlands and Portugal on July 26th and August 1st. And if you want even more from Sandra, make sure you check her out on the Attacking Third podcast that she co-hosts along with Lisa Carlin. They will have everything you need to know ahead of the World Cup. I'm sure they'll have an episode coming up on tap where they break down his U.S. roster to get you set for the Americans looking for a third straight World Cup.